Animism as a framework is really about earth honoring peoples, right? And all of us who live here on earth, somewhere in our lineage, have that that root, that lineage of our ancestors who lived in ways that were in relationship and in reciprocity with the earth, that didn't regard a mountain as just a thing or a river as just water passing by, but really like animate, alive teachers and beings that we can be in relationship with and learn from.
Welcome to the Entrepreneurs in Recovery podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Harless. This is a podcast where we explore healing stories of resilience. We explore entrepreneurship, holistic health, but we also explore the healing potential of psychedelics. And if this is your first time tuning into the show, welcome. This is episode number 86. I'm really excited because the show continues to grow, and it doesn't grow fast. It doesn't grow slow. It just grows the way it wants to. And I'm really excited because there's just many great guests coming on the show, and many people are starting to reach out about their journeys into healing with psychedelic medicines. I'm also getting people who have nothing to do with psychedelics who want to be on the show, who have incredible businesses and stories of entrepreneurship. So if any of this resonates to you, if you listen to some of the episodes and you want to be on the show, reach out to me. You can send me a message, jesse@jesseharless.com, or you can send a message to me on Instagram at jesseharless222. And thank you for all of you who are liking and subscribing on YouTube or leaving a review on Spotify or iTunes. Just helps more people to access the show. So with that said, I want to introduce today's guest, which is Erin Atkinson, who runs Prism Wellness. And Erin has quite the resume of trainings under her belt in the space. But what I really like about her story is the connection to earth medicine and connection to earth. Her story is just amazing when it comes to utilizing and integrating different aspects of what can help someone in integrating their journeys of psychedelics, and honestly just integrating life in general. I think a lot of the stuff we talked about today has been stuff you can apply whether you're into psychedelics or not. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Erin. It was fascinating. We dive into all these topics that I just really enjoy talking about as we're in this current climate of mental health and addiction and just disconnection from ourselves and to the earth. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Erin today. Hi, Erin. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Jesse. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to meet you again. We met not too long ago, and I think who did we meet through? I forgot which person in the psychedelic space.
I think it was just through Instagram.
Oh, nice.
I think I reached out to you on Instagram. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I like to share that because
Yeah.
I want to meet more friends like you and people who are doing great work in the space. And you certainly have a fascinating story. You have a story that I have yet to really learn much about, and we'll get into some of that. But yeah, I'm just grateful you're here. And I think that I love to start usually with people's stories. So if you'd like to maybe just let us know how a little bit about how did you become the Erin that you are today? And then we can dive into the parts of your story.
Hey, yeah, thank you. So when I think about kind of the threads that come back to the earliest development and being like into psychology and spirituality and those things, was really like my first. Well, I was raised, pretty traditional, pretty conservative kind of family, and it always was a little different. Felt a little different, and then in high school, I remember it was my first introduction to psychology. And I was just like, it was like a Psych 101 class. And I was just like, yes, that, was the first um, opportunity to dive more deeply into the ways that I was curious about people and the world. Like I was always kind of an observer and always had a little bit of different ideas about things. And psychology, as an introduction, was like there is a framework for understanding how people work and how the world works and why people do the things that they do. And then college, I got more into philosophy and, you know, started reading spiritual works at a younger age and just like exploring and feeling into those parts of myself. And yeah, psychology and philosophy. And I ended up doing my undergrad in psychology, minor in philosophy, master's degree, and later on in clinical social work, which to me at that time was kind of the practical application of psychology. It's like, what are we going to do with this knowledge? How do we support people and interact with those ways of being? And then I became a clinical social worker and in a therapist and private practice. And so a lot of those things and kind of mirroring the way that I grew up, the way that I was oriented to the world were really around the mind, like thinking about thinking, uh, linear frameworks and more traditional ways of thinking that were what I was taught in school and social work school certainly. And then just progressively over my journey, things just kind of peeling back the layers of, oh, I know there's more than that, right? More than just the mind. And those philosophy frameworks were kind of like about our place in the universe, our place in, meaning and purpose and connection. And I got really into yoga in my early 20s and became trained as a yoga teacher, also integrative medicine for mental health. So, kind of this mind, body, spirit orientation to healing. And throughout the years, I'd also had my own explorations with plant medicine. So, cannabis certainly was like my first plant teacher at a younger age, and mushrooms as well. Had my own kind of personal experiences and journeys with that. And then it wasn't until about 2019 ish, I think, when it started to be more in the topic of conversation of the therapeutic applications of psychedelics and um, how they could be more intentionally used for healing. And it was just like this big realization for me of like, oh wow, these two worlds really can come together, right? My personal passions and explorations and my career and kind of scholarly pursuits don't have to be separate and segregated, but really experiencing that opportunity to bring them all together. And actually, I mean, what I know now is that the best expression of my work in this role is that they are completely integrated and not separate. And yeah, just kind of gone through different trainings and explorations and deeper dives into my own spirituality and ancestral lineage. And so it kind of started in the mind, and then mind body, and then mind body spirit. And it's always like digging deeper and deeper into these different levels to where what I really see now is a whole picture, holistic picture is mind, body, spirit, community, like our relational interactions. And then as a part of, like, an inextricable part of nature and of the earth and, in relationship with other beings, plants, and, um, uh, yeah, the non-human in the world.
Yeah, I appreciate getting to hear some of your story, and I know that there's like even more of your story. I know there was maybe some substance abuse that you went through, and some other types of conditioning in the world, and I'm sure that also informed. But like you really just sparked my curiosity. We can talk about that, but this idea of like the earth medicine, earth wisdom, ancestral wisdom. I'm really curious because that's one of the things that was fascinating about your story was um, this idea or this topic of animism and being an animist. And I guess I want to just jump right into that because I'm curious. Number one, like what is an animist, and then how does that tie into your story of healing with some of the backstory that you have too?
Yeah. So, animism as a framework is really about earth honoring peoples, right? And all of us who live here on earth, somewhere in our lineage, have that. That root, that lineage of our ancestors who lived in ways that were in relationship and in reciprocity with the earth, that didn't regard, a mountain as just a thing or a river as just, water passing by, but really like animate, alive teachers and beings that we can be in relationship with and learn from. And so, yeah, animism is kind of the framework and the understanding that humans are not the only living consciousness, not the only expressions of spirit that are here on earth, but that we're actually all a part of this web of life and that we're all in relationship with one another. And whether that's you know, a healthy reciprocal relationship or a lot of times in our society, maybe like an extractive or abusive relationship um, with elements of nature, with animals, with plants. And I think for me, that really the the exploration came from first from my curiosity about my own ancestral roots. When I mentioned earlier, being into yogic philosophy and practicing yoga, and then later on, I trained in some South American medicine traditions. I'm trained as a combo practitioner as well. And a lot of spirituality throughout my life was exposed to me through different indigenous practices that were not my own. And while I have so much reverence and learned so much through those different traditions, I was curious about where are my roots, where are my earth honoring people that I can kind of learn from and relate to. And that led me to Druidry and kind of Celtic and pre Celtic wisdom and traditions. And I've studied in Druid practices. And really, that's the earth honoring ways of, European, Germanic, and Celtic peoples. And and then when I began to think about or consider how I would want to share this with other people, which in my psychotherapy practice, like what I have found is that a lot, and we can maybe get to this more, but a lot of what we see in pathology or in symptomology, like a lot of the um, distortion is in the the illusion of separation, right? That we're separate from the earth, we're different than the other, and we're kind of on our own to figure out what's wrong with us and use these tools that we're given to fix it. And ultimately that's often like putting a band-aid on it. So coming back to like relationality, like we are a part of something greater, we're a part of the earth, and we're in relationship with all of these other beings. And so through Celtic wisdom and Druidry, realizing these are really similar frameworks to Native American ideas, to South American ideas, to yoga philosophies that sort of exist as a thread that um, most, if not all, indigenous cultures share, which is the animate nature of our reality, right? That we are in relationship, that all things are living, that all things are manifestations of spirit. And I think that healed a lot for me, having grown up with a more rigid, mm, linear, contracted version of spirituality, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, and that we're ultimately born flawed and need redemption. And um, I think the animism for me has been kind of the reclamation of my own spirituality, the reclamation of like my own deeper wisdom that has always kind of been there and I didn't have a framework for before. And so I did a program to become an ordained minister. So I'm a minister of animism, and really like that practice is just about honoring this way of being and framework and belief system as equal to any religion or any other spiritual practice. It guides my values, and it also allows people to have access to like ceremonial services or ritual services or even death and dying services, um, and support in a framework that resonates for them, that doesn't have to be a Christian minister or something else that may not hold the same meaning.
Mm. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's the first time on the show we've had someone talk about animism, and I think a lot of words and a lot of things for people can be kind of spooky because it's outside of their belief system or their religion. And I think what I hear and what I really connect to is the number one, I think, epidemic addiction and let's call it delusion is the disconnection that people feel every day. And they feel disconnected from their, let's call it whatever words we want to use, say a soul, higher self, spirit, um, themselves, but also they're disconnected from nature and they're disconnected from this idea of things are alive. And that's why I think oftentimes we destroy nature, or we destroy things that we don't understand that are living. And I think for me personally, I really connect to that. I always have, for some reason. I've connected to rocks or rivers or streams or ponds or just, and even like trees and like they are alive, and even like animals and insects and all these things. They're I was very connected to them as a child, and now today, living in Costa Rica, I'm more connected than ever. Being in the ocean, surfing, and having this knowing that it is all alive. And it's, to me, it's beyond the words. The words are so uh, they're so cheap because the words to describe these feelings and connections to life, to all these different things, is to me, it's part of that disconnection. It's like I only feel connected when I'm scrolling, because I'm
Mhm.
getting dopamine hits, or I'm only feeling connected when I'm doing something, external. And I think that, yeah, part of feeling the wholeness, right, which is part of your business with, Prism Wellness, and it's that wraparound wholeness care of someone who is coming into this holistic journey, whether it's with medicines or not. I think being connected to nature and everything around you, and not just nature, like you said, indigenous wisdom, where this futon I'm on is alive, and whatever. It's like, I don't know why that's so hard to understand.
Yeah, and I think there's a part of us that immediately recognizes that truth when we give ourselves the permission, or we're given the permission to feel it, that it's so much more alive to recognize how we are connected to everything, and to like feel that little spark within us that's also reflected in the tree or the flower or the sun. And the ways that many of us are raised uh, to ignore or to dismiss those connections feels really constricting, contracted. And um, the process, the journey for me has been of re-enlivening, kind of reawakening those connections that are already inherent and the knowings that are already there, but just weren't encouraged or acknowledged or kind of given the space in the way that our culture predominantly is functioning.
Yeah, I think it's really important for people to get back into nature. And even if it's taking their shoes off and socks off and grounding and earthing into maybe you have dirt or grass, whatever you have. And I think like these practices, I feel there's a lot of practices that I feel were really dismissed and sort of, hey, I'm not going to do that. And now I feel like you can look at all these huge Instagram pages with all these doctors and whoever they are saying, okay, you want sunlight, you want,
Mhm.
you know, of course, sleep, but you want to do earthing and grounding. And I feel like all these things are coming back. Like they've been very obvious and been done for thousands and maybe millions of years, walking on the earth barefoot. But I feel like these practices of holistic ideas, connecting to trees and earthing and all these things, there, it's like it's to me, it's obvious. It's what's been here for such a long time for us to grasp. But I can understand why people wouldn't do that. It's like what benefits is that? What benefit does that give me? Because we're not taught through Western medicine and these lenses. Like you said, the mind. When you go to college, when I went to school for therapy, clinical mental health counseling, we weren't learning about these holistic practices, right?
Mm.
I was learning about cognitive behavioral therapy, your mind, your mind, your mind, rational emotive behavioral therapy, and that plays a role. Of course, it's really profound, actually, if you go really to the depths of it. And it's one tool, it's one way of thinking from the mind. And I think bringing in these, including somatic practices, getting into the body, but also just connecting to, and this, my next question is, you know, I don't usually talk about what the guests have done and all their accomplishments because people can look you up on Instagram. But the truth is, you have a really successful practice in Maryland,
Mhm.
and you have a therapist working under you, and you even do psychedelic assisted therapy with ketamine and all these different things. And so you have a
Mhm.
lot of experience. But what I'm interested in is how does the integration process of someone who has utilized, let's say, a psychedelic, how does one implement the ancestral wisdom and some of these things we're talking about into their integration practice?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think we're in this beautiful time where there's more awareness and um, hype. There's a more talk, more excitement, more curiosity about psychedelic medicines, and it's a beautiful thing because they can really offer um, a opportunity to kind of open up these constricted, contracted ways of thinking, of seeing ourselves, of viewing the world. And, many people do experience in medicine, maybe for the first time, that feeling of connectedness, that feeling of, you know, expansive belonging and universal love. And maybe that's something that was never really available to them before. And so I see psychedelic medicines as an amazing tool and ally and kind of pathway, and also them psychedelics not being the destination themselves, right? I see these medicines as a pathway to getting back to the things that we've talked about, like reconnecting to nature, examining relationship with other humans and non-humans. And so integrating these experiences, often experiences with psychedelics are really profound, really like ineffable, mystical, sometimes really difficult, like obviously not always rainbows and unicorns and universal love, but sometimes being shown really hard or difficult truths, or experiencing emotions that we've suppressed for our whole lives that are, kind of being brought to the surface. by the medicine so that they can be attended to, so that they can be healed and integrated. But the integration journey really is that holistic picture that I mentioned earlier, which is, mind, body, spirit, community, and nature. And so I like to think about it as kind of addressing or like attending to each of those domains in integration. So it might be, somatic practices, or for the mind, right? It might be we're working with thoughts and thought patterns and recognizing really challenging beliefs that we've held that are limiting or that are not serving or that are harmful to other people or to ourselves. So there's like the thoughts aspect, which is important. I mean, we use um, CBT frameworks, even in integration, and ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, like looking at like the structures and the patterns. Um, Body, right? There might be somatic practices or breath work that really help to both to connect to the awareness of what's happening in our body. Like emotions carry energy, and that energy kind of moves within and through our system and our body. And so somatic practices and breath work can be really helpful. Also, sometimes with psychedelics, as I mentioned, like things are kind of stirred up and brought to the surface. And so we might really need to like move and work with our body and work with that energy. Um, Spirituality, a really important part of integration as well, because experiences can both challenge our existing frameworks and belief systems about spirituality, can open new doors into um, connection with spirit, or sometimes like wake up spiritual intuitions for people. And so attempting to integrate without like acknowledging the spiritual aspect of psychedelic medicines can be really limiting, right? If we're just working with the thoughts. Um, I think community is a really important part of integration, both like can be with ceremony as well. Some of my most reparative experiences with and as a part of community have been in ceremony, and like it's an opportunity to kind of repair the relational wounds that we might have, the you know limitations of hyper individualism and competition, and you know differences that really in the medicine space we often feel a connection, and we're meeting each other as humans who are all on this journey together. And so community is a huge part. And even integration circles, like post journey, if someone has an individual medicine experience and then they might come to an integration circle which has people that they never would have otherwise encountered in their life, but have this kind of shared ineffable experience of the psychedelic journey and their maybe like hero's journey in that space. And so we can more easily meet each other as just humans moving along this journey and in a more vulnerability and more connection and nature, right? Like if our practices and tools and modalities, if they're not eventually guiding us back to our our inner knowings and our connection with nature and like what we're doing here on earth, and caring a bit more about how we interact with the earth, and um, wanting to make a difference in this larger web of life, if they're not leading us back there eventually, then we're missing a piece, because like that's really kind of at the heart of it for me. Um, that it all leads back to these new old ways, as some might say, the remembering of the things that we've always known to be true, and the simple practices that are connecting us with the earth and with our like innate ways of being.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, I think for me, it's easy for me to connect to that because I've been so connected to nature since I was a child. And I think moving to Costa Rica, a big part of it was to be connected with nature every day, even deeper. And I did that back in New Hampshire as well. I visited the river almost 7 days a week and walked through the forests, even if it was snowing, it didn't matter, and even jumping in the cold water and just being a part of what was around me, what I had, that's what I had around me. So that's what I utilize. And that's what I recommend for anyone listening is it's to start small, start with where nature is around you now. You can have plants in your house too and all that. But I think going outside and connecting with, even if it's cloudy or it's raining, like, just get out there and feel the rain and connect with whatever life is happening. There's a butterfly right there on my wall, and I can see the sun out there. Not everyone has a butterfly and sun out. Maybe it's a little cooler out, but it doesn't matter. It's like whatever environment you're in, connecting with that environment. And it's, to me, it's just beyond religion, it's beyond beliefs, it's just being with what is in the present moment, which I think is really hard for people, is to live in the now. I think that's a really challenging place to live when we're so addicted to the foods and to technology and addicted to our past and our stories and our patterns, and it's hard to just be present today. And I think that's the bonus gift of being in nature. Or even if there's snow on the ground, take your shoes off, put your feet in the snow. It might seem intense and maybe only do that for a short period of time, but it puts you in the present moment. And that's another thing that I've learned is like getting in that present moment to really be with the now, which to some would say there only is the present moment. I think I really resonate to that. And I hope people listening, it's like, you don't have to go out and start worshiping trees and doing tree rituals, but you can if you want. But it's really just get out there, connect. So, what are some ways people can do this? Like, if someone wanted to just go outside their back door, front door, and they're like, okay, I want to start these practices. Maybe I don't want to be an animist right away. I mean, that's cool to me. I would look into that. But if
Mhm.
someone else was just, I just want to start small, because you don't have to do psychedelics and then this is your integration process. This is just life. Like, that's what
Yeah.
I'm saying. It's so funny when the word integration too is,
Right.
it's like, oh my God, journaling and this and meditate. It's like, that's what you should be doing every day anyways, just as a human, to just integrate the challenges and the beauty of life. But like having to talk about that process with someone who did psychedelics, it's really important as well because of the deep insights. But let's just start with that. How do you go outside and start this practice of connecting with, like, what do you do? What would you recommend for someone who is integrating a journey or not, just wanting to start to build a practice?
I think, as you said, like the biggest barrier to any practices are that we overcomplicate them in our mind or think like, oh, we have to like have this whole, ritual or framework around what it is that we're doing, and just really allowing it to be simple. Like going, yeah, planting your feet in the grass, or one of the things that I often tell my clients who are maybe like experiencing a lot of anxiety or overwhelm or chaos is just like literally lay your body on the earth and just like feel yourself being held. And there is no greater place to be held and supported. That's like, it's always there. The earth is always there, and you can feel the weight of kind of gravity and the way that the places that your body meets the earth. So being in nature, um, putting your feet in the grass, and connecting with your senses, right? Like, what do you hear, taste, smell, touch? Uh, I forgot one. Oh, see. And allowing that, yeah, bringing your awareness into the present. And through connecting with your senses, you're like kind of like opening those receptors to receive a little bit. And yeah, I think all the ways that can be very simple, finding even if you live in the city, like finding a source of water, even if it's a fountain or something that's man-made. But water is one of the most incredible, beautiful healing elements, and it's available everywhere in all forms, in some form, that can be connected to.
Yeah, one of the things, yeah, I think that's, yeah, it's on normalizing something that was so normal for humans for eons. It's
Right.
just kind of bringing it back because we're there's this joke about us being in boxes. We're in a box car, we're in a box room, we're in a box house. Get outside the box, right? Go outside
Mhm.
and be out in nature. And even if you only have a little bit of nature, whatever is there. I'm curious about, so you in your practice you offer ketamine assisted therapy,
Mhm.
and this is something that I've talked a lot about on the show, and we talk about different medicines, but ketamine's the one that's sort of leading because it's legal in the United States and in a specific form, and I'm curious, why did you choose to have that in your practice, offering that to clients, and how does that go beyond traditional talk therapy utilizing
Mhm.
ketamine assisted therapy?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, it's one of the most accessible, really widely safe, in terms of medication interactions and um, different biologies. It's really accepted to be very safe for most people, unless you have one of the few specific contraindications. It's available because it's legal, and so it can be a really beautiful kind of introductory medicine too to expanded states of consciousness in general. I think of ketamine as kind of like helping to expand the capacity to reach different emotional material or different sort of layers of consciousness that might not be available to us in talk therapy. I mean, traditional talk therapy can be kind of intense, right? If we just think about like sitting face to face and you're like, you know, talking about your childhood and your problems um and yeah, there are many beautiful things about it and different ways to approach it and um different modalities that are really helpful and still often, we're pretty programmed to be operating out of our logical, thinking, rational prefrontal cortex mind. And so that's ongoing story and narrative for people often tells us that we're not safe to go into those deeper things, that we can't really, you know, relax enough or settle in enough to access what's underneath the surface. And so ketamine as a medicine can help kind of expand that capacity a little bit. Um, and there are different routes of administration, right? With IM, you might be going really deep into a ketamine experience. And with like lozenges or lower doses, it can be more interactive. So you could be having a more interactive um, therapy session or like guided session where you're able to, and your therapist is able to kind of use your existing mm, work and rapport and like landscape that you have been working on in therapy and then help to get to some of those deeper levels and really helps give deeper access to the body too often, even though it is a dissociative anesthetic, so kind of like separates us from the body a little bit, but in that there's less activation, less vigilance in the system. And so we're able to kind of get to some of those deeper, yeah, subconscious layers.
Yeah, it's that's been my experience too. Utilizing ketamine assisted therapy is, there's been a lot of, it's often called the default mode network, right? It's that part of your brain
Mhm.
that is always talking. It's always on. It's always talking, and so utilizing in a, we're talking about in a therapeutic setting, being able to administer ketamine and then having this default mode network sort of shut down, shut off, shut down, or just kind of move to the side as you access different parts of your brain, maybe different access to consciousness that you can't really access because your brain is always in these patterns. And I find that ketamine assisted therapy can help to shut that down, and then you can access those different parts of yourself, which are going to be hopefully integrated, like we talked about when we opened this podcast up, is the integration process. My other question is, um, so this question is something that is a really important one where I am in Costa Rica and beyond. So there's this whole idea, which is synthetic versus plant medicine. And so you
Mm.
have this debate, which is very interesting to me because these things are all tools. And I think when we get into this black and white thinking about synthetic versus plant medicine, you're someone who obviously is deep into animism and this idea that everything is alive. Well, let's talk about ketamine then. What is the idea with ketamine? If that is something that is man-made and synthetic, how do we look at ketamine as a way that is, maybe maybe it does have, let's say, you hear like the spirit of ayahuasca, the spirit of peyote,
Mhm.
the spirit of cannabis. What about ketamine? Where does that one lie?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, when I first got into, I talked a little bit about my um, relationship with mushrooms and other plant teachers earlier on. And then when I first did my training for psychedelic assisted therapy, at that time, the only medicine or the only training available was the MAPS, MDMA assisted psychotherapy training, which now, there are many different like programs and, ways to access different trainings. But then at that time it was only MDMA and just, the synthetic versus nature um, discussion. At that time I was a little bit skeptical. I was like, I don't know, how I feel. I'm more of like an earth medicine woman. I don't know how I feel about kind of a pharmaceutical um man-made medicines and like what that, all of the implications of that. But I did do the training um and since, have developed my own relationship with MDMA and really just witnessed the profound healing capacity of this medicine. And I believe that really they all have their place. And then ketamine as well. Ketamine in my practice came after MDMA. And I think of earth medicines, mushrooms, ayahuasca, combo, um, cactus as, they're gifts from the earth, sort of like directly grown from and like given to us, not to us, but um, for us to kind of walk with. And as a gift, as this, healing wisdom that we can engage with. And then there are these other medicines that are equally a gift and equally needed in this time. And I think that's just really shows through when it is used and practiced and held with intention, with care, with reverence, with like all of these different frameworks that we've been kind of talking about, respect for the medicine and safety and all of that, that the the outcomes are speaking for themselves, right? People do have very profound experiences with ketamine and with MDMA. And so I think it is more about how we're holding it and the awareness that we're holding and the care that we are putting into it than it is about where it was, where it came from. And I think it's very nuanced and kind of interesting exploration, but these medicines definitely have their place, and especially in the way that they're more accepted in this time because we're coming from this really kind of um traditional scientific like evidence-based framework of what is acceptable. And so there needs to be some kind of bridge, if we're going to get to more acceptance and um, permissibility, like legalization of earth medicines. I think that, ketamine and MDMA can really help to kind of bridge the gap between the system and kind of as it is and kind of where I believe we're going, and where the potential and possibility are.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I mean, I feel there's systems and structures in place that make things take a long time to get to the mainstream, and some of those structures are uh, bizarre and seem nefarious, but I think there's some of them obviously are there to keep people safe, and I think there's a way of doing this that has been chosen by a select few to bring it out. But I think it's moving a little faster because we have so many incredible studies happening with veterans and PTSD and what we're seeing with MDMA, and of course ibogaine. Really exciting to see that that moving forward. But even that is a little delayed still. So I'm excited to see this, like you said, as we have something that's been around for a while, ketamine. Obviously, plant medicine's been around a lot longer, but the ketamine's been studied in all these different ways and forms as an anesthetic and for pain and all these different things. But now we know it can treat depression and anxiety and PTSD, and even bizarrely, it can even treat addiction, which is controversial. But depending on how it's done and setting and dose, it also
Mhm.
can do that as well. But I think that's the kind of the point of these conversations. It's to have um, to start to understand, like, why am I so against certain things? And it's like, does that come from me, or is that the programming that I'm programmed to believe? And I think when you start to get into this world of psychedelic assisted therapy or just psychedelics, and you start to realize, like, wow, there's a lot of different medicines, and they all have their place in a different way, shape, or form. MDMA assisted therapy is very different than ketamine assisted therapy,
Mhm.
and same with like ayahuasca or peyote, if you're going to be working with those. So what I'm hearing is, they all have their place, and by having a synthetic forms of these, this is moving this legalization process forward. And so that's what I'm hearing is it's sort of like, this is what we have, and
Mhm.
this is what we got to work with, and then hopefully we can have psilocybin eventually being legal. And you seeing cannabis is obviously one that's has is legal at a state level in some states but not federally. So you're seeing things move forward slowly but surely. What do you think is next for looking at, because you were trained in maps, and if people have listened to the show before, you know what maps is, and you can look up maps.org and check that out. And but what do you think is sort of next on the docket for legalization, with all the medicines that are currently available? Because you're actively, this is your business, you're into the integration, the actual
Mhm.
administration. What do you think is sort of next to be brought into the forefront for legalization?
Yeah, I mean, I think psilocybin is a medicine that we are seeing a lot of movement on, and is really exciting and hopeful for me. Certainly, like in places like Oregon and in Colorado, and many places that it's also decriminalized, like whether that's cities or counties or smaller jurisdictions. And even in Maryland, we have a psychedelic task force. Many states do now as well. And so, just looking at the landscape, like what feels kind of the most within reach at this time feels like psilocybin with mushrooms, and largely because they're so safe, right? They're so safe. They um, grow everywhere freely in nature on all continents except Antarctica. It's like I could, if we knew what we were looking for, we could probably each um, go into nature ourselves and forage our own medicine, or easily grow medicine at home. But there's a really great safety profile for psilocybin as well. And so the risk is a bit lower. I think from an um ancestral kind of lens as well. Like most, if not all, of our ancestors probably worked with some kind of mushroom at some point for visionary states or for healing purposes. They they grow everywhere. And in, ancient artifacts in many different cultures across the earth, we see mushroom images. And I don't think that's by accident.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting one to talk about the mushrooms and art that, and there's a whole books on this that talked about. Yeah, it's really fascinating. I always think about that when I bring guests on and we're talking about psychedelics is, how much of the history, I mean, history is written by the winners. So how much of history was erased by people who didn't want to show that history of psychedelic use? And we have what we do have from history, but I feel like there's probably a lot more that got erased. And, um, you know, because even in spiritual texts, you see what was put in, what was taken out, what was chosen to be put in. And I wonder if there was more mystical experiences with psychedelics that was taken out, to keep it
Mhm.
outside of yourself, to keep the experience outside instead of being an inward journey that can
Yeah.
happen on your own, but they can be enhanced by psychedelics as they, like I said, shut down the default mode network, get to your
Mhm.
course true self and
Yeah.
receive answers. And many of these answers are really important. And I think one of the things that we briefly touched on addiction, but if you're in Maryland and addiction impacts many states and all states, but I think of Baltimore and
Right.
the epidemic that's happening with fentanyl and the crisis and the methadone and these clinics and people are. I mean, it's just I've heard a lot about what's happening there, and I just think about that, and I think about like even psilocybin, like having access to psilocybin at a
Yeah.
basic level. So there's not just access to methadone, we have access to these other medicines that could be maybe more beneficial for the
Mhm.
process of not just healing, but also the withdrawal process and all these things. So these are all the things that I want to keep bringing to the forefront, so that it's like
Yeah.
it's so bizarre that we can access alcohol
Right.
anytime, but I can't access the safest
Mhm.
medicine on the planet, which is psilocybin, and be
Yeah.
able to do those at, like doses that are microdoses, or if they're larger doses, co-regulating with someone, doing with an integration guide, or but it's these things that keep me going, these conversations of like just looking at what's actually happening and being able to offer more solutions for people that just seem so obvious at this stage but are not.
Mhm.
And so yeah, just yeah, you're in a place where there's just a lot of things happening, and I think that if we could gain access to these medicines like psilocybin, then this ancestral wisdom and this animism idea and connecting nature would probably be a lot easier, because
Mhm.
what are mushrooms like to show, and many medicines, right? They connect you into nature.
Yeah. And you mentioned microdosing a little bit. I do a lot of education and consultation around microdosing and mental health. And I think it is really one of the most profound tools that we have right now to help people kind of transition from or open to the possibility of another way of healing that is not um, the things that we've kind of been throwing at mental health for a long time that aren't really working. um, and because it's so safe, because you can engage with the mushrooms in a really small, measured, like subtle way. And, from an animist lens, it's like engaging with a teacher, as you're this like gentle, quiet wisdom as you're moving throughout your day. The mushrooms are our teachers. They are intelligent, and they can really be guides on the healing journey. And so for someone who is maybe coming from treatment resistant depression and many years in the mental health system and tried everything and it doesn't work, but has some reservations about like diving into a full dose journey, or like really that, chaos and surrender and all that that entails. Microdosing can be really helpful in gently kind of opening to connection with oneself. I mean, I really think about mushrooms as kind of the great connectors. They innervate and like carry information through the soil, through the earth, among plants and all things. And so that's what they help us to do in our body and our own internal system too, is kind of like rewire these connections and like bring life to the places of us within us that have become closed off, have become kind of hardened and stifled. And so yeah, I think microdosing is a really powerful tool right now. And certainly if it were decriminalized everywhere, then would be more accessible.
Yeah, I think that was my introduction to psychedelic assisted therapy was microdosing. And
Mhm.
you know, you might not know my background much, but I mean, I'm coming from the world of 100% abstinence, really rigid
Mhm.
thinking, which serves a purpose for sure. And it served a purpose for me for a while until I was um, sort of exposed to psychedelics so many times I couldn't not look at it and see, especially with like the treatment resistant depression and PTSD, all these things that were undeniable that were starting to be treated. um, Microdosing for me was the way I started, and I was guided, and I actually did a little training with the third wave and all these different things to
Mhm.
try to learn how to do it properly. But I that was my introduction, and I think for many that could be a really great pathway for people to start. And obviously, there's legality. We have issues with gaining access and being able to start. But if if someone was to start that journey of microdosing, what do you recommend? What would the path be for that?
Microdosing, I mean, and mushrooms particularly are, I think, some of the most accessible. I mean, in places like in DC, for instance, they're decriminalized. Many like smaller jurisdictions around the country, they're decriminalized or accessible. Um, I work do consultation with a group called Mycology Psychology, who provides access to medicine. So many different ways. And it's kind of like a journey back to the self and towards more personal sovereignty. And ultimately, that could look like eventually somebody growing their own medicine in their home. And like, what an empowering experience that is to kind of nurture and, cultivate medicine for yourself and then be able to work with that medicine for your own healing. There are many companies out there who do spores and things like that and grow kits. And so I think there are lots of ways to access it and lots of great information online. Definitely, even like the information and resources on mycolegypsychology.com are really great and helpful. And and more people are becoming aware, awake, and attuned to this as a treatment modality for mental health. And I also run a consultation group for therapists and clinicians, psychologists, psychiatrists, doctors who maybe have had their own microdosing experiences and then are curious about, well, how do I even talk to or navigate this in the clinical space with my clients who I know could really benefit from it. So for me, it's about harm reduction and psychoeducation and um, supporting people in, maybe pursuing their curiosities and helping them to make sure that they're safe, as opposed to obviously making any treatment recommendations, as I am a licensed therapist. But it's important it's out there and like many people are exploring and being curious. So the more information and the more kind of community we can have around microdosing, I think the better.
Yeah, for sure. It's exciting. I'm excited with the work you're doing, and I think a lot of the there's a lot of hopium because there's a mental health crisis, there's an addiction crisis, there's a depression crisis. There's so many things happening right now, and suicide, and just there's so much going on. And I think it's easy to get caught in the depressive side of it, but it's when you're actually out there doing it. You have a practice in Maryland with a few offices, and you're offering all these types of support and the things and the resources you've mentioned. And I think that's really my favorite part of guests like you is you're taking the action. It's like, yeah, all this stuff's going on and we're taking action, even if,
Mhm.
not everything is moving at a speed or even the legality is moving at the speed, but we have what we have to access. And the most important is we have education for free, like the
Mhm.
podcast here, as to educate people for free of what's out there and helping people to gain access to this information. Because, in 2 to 4 years, it's going to be a different landscape. You're going to have a different world in 2 to 4 years when it comes to this stuff, when it comes to psychedelic access. Hopefully that improves too, but having more psychedelic education, the legalities of this, especially with MDMA assisted therapy, psilocybin, and ibogaine too. I really see that one moving forward and more access to it. And so yeah, it's really exciting. So I guess what are you most excited about that you're bringing into reality right now with your practice or your life or whatever you're doing besides or with psychedelics?
Hmm. Well, as you said, Prism Wellness is my practice, and we're really growing and expanding. And we've just brought in our first licensed therapist in Colorado as well, and expanding to other states that have some more movement and legislation in the psychedelic space. So expanding into Colorado, Texas, California, Oregon. These are kind of the next steps, and really, it's about building a community of therapists and clinicians that share this value system, that kind of share this framework that what we're doing here in psychotherapy and in these spaces is more than just, you know, retraining the mind, but we're really ultimately doing spiritual work in many cases, no matter what we're calling it. Like we're, you know, helping people to come back to themselves, to come back to truth, to come back to their knowings and the ways that we're all connected. And so, Prism, we really bring in therapists and practitioners, coaches from all different lineages, from all different identities and lived experiences, because that's like the full expression of humanity. And so we all have our gifts that come from the places that we've trained or, where we're from or our own ancestral lineages that we can bring forward to really be a part of this paradigm shift in mental health, right? Um, this movement towards more connection, more community, really expanding what we think about when we think about mental health, that we can't do it in segregation. And that, it's the illusion of separation that has really gotten us to this crisis of mental health and addiction and a lot of societal issues. And so the the antidote is connection. It's rooting more deeply and connecting more broadly to each other.
Yeah, that's very exciting. I'm excited that we're connected and the great work that you're doing. I'm sure that we'll stay connected and help each other because many people know that my business is the psychedelic concierge. So I try to find people who are doing incredible work in the space and be a bridge for people to access this type of information, which I have access to, and many people don't. And so it's really exciting to connect with you, Erin, and be able to learn about all the great work you're doing and be able to hear about sort of like the expansion, into Colorado and to different states as it becomes more adopted. Hopefully, I'm from Massachusetts originally, and
Mhm.
Massachusetts looks like maybe they'll start to move forward with some of these initiatives with psychedelics. But like I
Yeah.
said, I think in 2 years it'd be a different landscape. But for now, we'll work with what we have. We'll work with the tools that we have.
Yeah.
Working with mm, you know, psychedelics have become a lot about psychological problems and mental health and addiction, which originally was probably not its intention and probably was addressing those for eons, but wasn't really talked about. But today it's really because of COVID and post COVID and all these things that we have just gone through. I think it's really, it's really picked up a lot of momentum. So I'm
Mhm.
really grateful to connect with you and be able to continue this conversation as it unfolds and watch, just watch the access to these these teachers and these this option for people to be able to gain some relief. So for some it's just relief, for some
Yeah.
it's spiritual expansion, for some it's
Yeah.
getting into the body and really connecting, getting out of the mind. And so yeah, I'm excited for the future. Thanks for coming on the show, and it's great to meet you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jesse. Great to talk to you.
Thank you for checking out Entrepreneurs of Recovery podcast. We are so appreciative that you are here. Make sure you go ahead and like and subscribe to the show on YouTube. Leave a review on iTunes and Spotify so more people can find the show. Once again, thank you so much. We have great episodes and content come out in the future. Thank you for being here. Have a blessed day.